Good evening, everyone who might be watching on TV. It's the April 7th meeting of the Town Council. We have several items on consent and some other business to conduct tonight. We're going to start with roll call. Ms. Neese.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Sayak. Councilmember Rennie.
Council members may need to unmute their phones.
Okay, we're going to try again.
Okay.
Sorry, technical difficulty. So
Sorry.
we'll start with roll call.
Councilmember Sayak.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. We're going to start with closed session report. Mr. Schultz.
Yes, prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss labor negotiations. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
And next is council and manager matters. Again, I'm going to start with Ms. Pavetti.
Thank you, Mayor. The town has been very active in its provision of information and materials and resources to our town residents and businesses. Please visit our COVID-19 dedicated website that you will find on the front page of our website. You'll see great information, not only from the Public Health Department, but also ways that you can help donate as well as volunteer, or if you need help, either as a business or a resident, there are resources for you there. So please visit. We've got lots of things happening within the town to help support all of us at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavetti. The council people also serve on other committees, as many of you know. Most of those have been suspended, but if any council person has something they'd like to report at this time to the community, please let us know. So I'll just go down the line because it's easier. Vice Mayor, anything to report?
Sure. The sanitation board has not had a meeting to shut down. However, last week, anticipating that we will be having a meeting tomorrow, we met in order to finalize and confirm that our use of video conferencing for our board and staff for future meetings was effective, and it was. And also I have participated in all of Dr. Cody's county COVID-19 conferences.
Thank you. Councilman Rennie?
The BTA board met virtually by Zoom, mostly passing emergency ordinance kinds of things and getting an update on the BART to San Jose Phase 1 and Phase 2. Also, yesterday, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Risk Oversight Committee met, obviously talking about the effect on our finances and just declining load and so forth. And that's it.
Councilwoman Sayak?
Yes, I've been participating in the League of Cities meetings, conference calls that have been happening on a weekly basis, and sharing information worthwhile to our town manager for distribution.
And thanks all of you for what you are doing and staff. Which brings us to our consent calendar. Tonight we have 9 items on consent. These are usually passed as a group. If we have people in the audience, we offer them the opportunity to pull them. We will figure out how to be doing that in the future, given our email communication that we're using right now for public comment. But that said, does any member of the council wish to pull an item from consent? Okay, hearing nothing. Excuse me? Does any member of council wish to pull an item from consent? Okay, hearing nothing, is there a motion on the consent calendar?
I move to approve the consent items on our calendar.
Is there a second? Moved by Councilwoman Sayak, seconded by Mr. Rennie. I do have to do a roll call vote on this. Vice Mayor?
I will be voting no on agenda item 8 and yes on the remainder.
Okay, thank you. And agenda item 8 is a implementation of a temporary public parklet on a portion of Grays Lane. I'm reading the description. To promote community vitality and continue to gather information on possible options for the future downtown streetscape improvements. Councilman Rennie.
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc.
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes. It passes 3-1. And council members, can I ask you that in general you keep your phones on mute until I call on you or you indicate that you want to speak on an item, because we do get a little bit of background noise from your calls.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
as clarification, you said that the consent calendar passed 3-1.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're correct.
It would be 3-1 except for one agenda item.
Right. So I'm sorry. The consent calendar as a whole did pass unanimously. However, the vice mayor voted no on one particular item. That's item 8. Thank you for that clarification. Which brings us to agenda item number 10, and Councilwoman Sayoc.
Yes, I am employed by one of the agencies that is listed, and so I will recuse myself, hanging up, and then we'll come back onto the meeting when appropriate if someone texts me.
Thank you very much. And we'll wait for a second for that to happen.
Unknown participant is now joining.
Mariko.
Is now exiting.
Okay. So the unknown participant is a staff member?
It is the town clerk.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to do these somewhat differently so that we make sure that we have received public comment. Those items that came in on public comment under our normal time constraints have been included in the packets and posted publicly, and so are available and part of the record. Any item that came in after our deadline, Ms. Neese will be reading out on every agenda item to the extent that we received one. So we did not receive, and I'm going to confirm with Ms. Neese, who hopefully can hear me, we did not receive any items for verbal communication, correct? Well, Ms. Pavetti, maybe you can confirm that?
That is correct.
So we did not do verbal communications, we did not receive any. So now we're on to, thank you. Now we're on to item number 10, which is authorize the town manager to amend existing human services grant agreements with West Valley Community Services, Counseling and Support Services for Youth, Next Door Solutions, and Live Oak Senior Nutrition to donate an additional $10,000 to each organization for a total of $40,000 to assist town residents with needed services due to the COVID-19 and related public health orders. Ms. Pavetti.
Thank you, Mayor. This agenda item provides an opportunity for our town council to consider additional discretionary payments to 4 organizations who have really stepped up in the fight and service of the COVID-19 situation. Each one provides a different set of services, so they are dealing with unique populations. One deals with youth mental health, others deal with domestic violence, a third provides rental assistance and food assistance, and then the 4th one handles primarily senior nutrition needs. They've all really been great within our community, and while there are a lot of other wonderful efforts happening across Los Gatos to help those in need, these 4 organizations already have an existing relationship with the town, so it would be very easy for us to be able to provide $10,000 to each of them for a total of $40,000 is our way of saying thank you and helping support our community. And with that, I'm available for other questions. As mentioned by the mayor, we did receive correspondence that was provided in addenda and in a desk item supporting this notion, and verbally I had heard appreciation from the other 2 organizations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. Are there questions from council members? And if you have a question, simply identify yourself.
This is Rob, I have one.
Please go ahead, Mr. Rennie.
I just want to make sure the table on the second, well, it's just after the second page of our staff report, that represents what we passed before adding this $40,000. So the grand total adopted for 1920 says 142,000, so it's going to become 182. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, as indicated, we did receive emails. Ms. Neese, do you want to just remind us who sent the emails rather than reading them out, because I believe that they did come in under the deadline?
For item 10, we received an email from Kathy Milinoff from Live Oak Senior Nutrition Center, and from Josh Stulo from West Valley Community Services.
Thank you. Those are the public comments, so I'll look to the council now for motions or discussion.
This is Barbara Spector. I'm going to move to authorize the town manager to amend the existing human services grant agreements with West Valley Community Services, Counseling and Support Services for Youth, Next Door Solutions, and Live Oak Senior Nutrition to donate an additional $10,000 to each organization for a total of $40,000 to assist town residents with needed services due to COVID-19 and related public health matters.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, this is Rob. I will second that and thank staff for bringing this opportunity forward. This is a great time to do this.
Okay, it's moved by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Councilman Rennie, and I am going to call a roll call again vote. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Mayor votes yes, with Councilwoman Sayoc recused. It passes 3-0. And one abstention, recusal. Thank you very much, and we'll now get Councilwoman Sayoc back on the phone.
And Mayor, excuse me, this is the town clerk.
Yes.
We did have one public comment on item number 8 that was received after 11 o'clock. Would you like me to read that?
We can. Item number 8 was part of the consent calendar, but yes, for the record, why don't you go ahead?
We received a comment from Jim Foley for the Graves Lane Parkway. This is a great idea to add a new area for gathering and events at a very appropriate location. Let's keep building on the successful changes we have implemented downtown under your guidance.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to item number 11 and get Councilwoman Sayoc back on the phone.
Hello, I'm back. Mariko.
Welcome back.
Joining.
We're moving on to item number 11, which is introduction of an ordinance by title only affecting amendments to Chapter 29 of the Town Code regarding family daycare home regulations. And I understand Mr. Paulson is going to give us the staff report, and he is also on the phone. Mr. Paulson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Town Council. Good evening. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. This item is in reference to a bill that was signed in September of last year by Governor Newsom, amending the regulations regarding family daycare homes. The ordinance and attachment 4 of the staff report contains the modifications to Town Code to bring this into compliance with the new state law as recommended by the Planning Commission. That concludes my report, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paulson. Does any member of the council have a question for Mr. Paulson? Hearing none, I do believe.
This is Rob running up. Just a question. So the changes in this are exactly as needed by the state requirement. There's nothing extra, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, Councilwoman Sayak, any questions?
None.
No.
Ms. Neese, did we receive any public comment on this item?
We did not.
Thank you. So I'll close the public hearing and look to the council for a motion and/or discussion.
I move to introduce the ordinance that in attachment 4 by title only, affecting amendments to chapter 29 of the town code regarding family daycare home regulations.
It's moved by Councilwoman Sayak. Is there a second?
Second by Councilman Rennie.
I heard the second by the Vice Mayor first, so it's seconded by the Vice Mayor. Any comment on the motion before I call the question? Okay, again, roll call. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilwoman Rennie?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayak?
Yes.
The mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. Do we need to read the title, Mr.
Yes.
Schultz? Ms. Neese?
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding family daycare home regulations.
Thank you. So we will move on to item number 12. Again, introduction of an ordinance by title only affecting amendments to Chapter 29 regarding accessory dwelling units to conform with state law. Mr. Paulson, will you be doing the report on this as well?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mayor. In October 2019, Governor Newsom signed 3 bills that amended the regulations regarding accessory dwelling units. The ordinance in attachment 5 of your staff report contains the modifications to the town code to bring the town into compliance with new state laws as recommended by the Planning Commission. There is an addendum for this matter, and that concludes my report, and I'm available to answer questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Paulson?
This is Mariko. I do have a question of staff.
Go ahead.
We did receive a comment today, I don't know if it's an addendum or just item, with regard to the 4 feet setback. And so any staff comments to that public comment that we received?
Thank you, Councilwoman Sayak. This is Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. We did review that. That was one of the options we provided to the Planning Commission to consider. When they considered that, they decided not to include that allowance in the ordinance as you see it this evening. Obviously, the Town Council, should they feel that this is something that would be appropriate, you can make that modification pursuant to direction this evening in a motion moving forward.
Any follow-up?
And just to clarify, if I do have a follow-up, so it is within our purview, though, to choose not to follow the 4-foot setback.
Mr. Schultz?
So there's a difference of opinion across the state on whether it's required for attached and detached. It certainly is required for a detached ADU, but it's unclear, and the language is unclear. And so we've taken the position, and so has many others, I think City of San Jose, is that it does not apply to attached. The ordinance would have to be reviewed by HCD after we approve it. So again, as Joel said, we certainly can include it for attached, but right now our opinion is still that it doesn't apply to the attached ADUs.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Just to clarify, Mr. Schultz, the email that we received suggested that not adopting the 4-foot setback was not allowed under the law, and what you've indicated is that that's at least subject to interpretation, so that if the council wishes to go with what the Planning Commission approved, it can do that going forward?
Correct.
Thank you. Other questions from council?
Yes, from Rob.
Go ahead, Mr. Rennie.
So I want to make sure I understand. I think what we're saying, and the person that sent the letter was saying, is a detached can have a setback of only 4 feet, but if we attach it, it has to be 10 feet, I think it was. And their suggestion was that attached should also be 4 feet so that we aren't encouraging detached over attached. Is that my understanding correct?
Mr. Paulson or Mr. Schultz?
This is Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. That's for her specific instance, the setback would be 10 feet, but what the current ordinance says is that attached accessory dwelling units have to meet the setbacks of the zone. So depending on the zone, there's different side setbacks.
And Mr. Schultz, okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Rennie, go ahead.
But in the case of a detached one, then it only has to be 4 feet, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Any questions, Vice Mayor?
No, I don't have any. Well, maybe, since you asked me. I just want to confirm that the setback, if we read the ordinance as it comes forward from the Planning Commission, the setback would be consistent with whatever zone the dwelling is in. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
And the only reason 10 feet came up in the communication we received is because that person was speaking to a zone that had a 10-foot setback.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you both.
Any other questions from members of the council?
I do have
Mr. Rennie?
Or do we have any community comment on this one?
I believe we only have the email that we've all been discussing. I think it came in within the deadline, and so it's included in the packet, so we would not read it out this evening because it's been publicly available, but that's the only one.
Okay. My question really is I'm trying to understand why we might not take the public member's comment in that direction. So what it's saying is if it's attached, we don't want to give it the extra setback. And I'm thinking, is that because somebody might make an attached ADU and then later just make it part of their house, and so they've effectively kind of cheated the setback?
I don't know if Mr. Paulson or Mr. Schultz wants to answer that.
So this is Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. I'll start, and then if the town attorney has anything to add. We weren't necessarily afraid of certain circumstances. That is definitely a possibility. I think it was, as the town attorney stated before, staff's position that this was not required for attached units to be allowed to go down to 4 feet. So there's a few issues. One you mentioned. The other is that currently our zoning code allows you to extend a non-conforming setback. As this becomes part of the house, there could be the potential for folks to try to add to their home with that same 4-foot setback, which would not currently be allowed if it maintained the setback of the zone. So those are a couple potential challenges, none of which we can't overcome should the council believe that this is an appropriate change to the ordinance to allow attached units to be 4 feet from the side setback.
Mr. Schultz, anything to add?
No, I think Mr. Paulson said it all.
Okay. Mr. Rennie, did that answer your question?
Yeah, another follow-on question if I could.
Go ahead.
So is there, does staff see any reason why we should be encouraging attached ADUs versus detached ADUs? Is that saving more yard space maybe, or will it look better? Does the staff have any opinion on that?
Thank you, Councilmember Rennie. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. Staff isn't encouraging one over the other. Attached versus detached, they just have different parameters, in this instance setbacks. But we don't prefer one over the other. We think that all ADUs, whether attached or detached, are important because they provide the potential for affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to confirm with Ms. Neese that the only comment we did receive was the email that we've been discussing. And Ms. Neese, maybe you can tell us who sent that? And
That is the only communication we received, and it was sent by Lawrence and Mary Ann Berkowitz.
thank you. So I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing and look to the council for discussion and/or motion.
Mayor,
Yes, Vice Mayor.
I'm going to move to introduce an ordinance by title only effecting amendments to Chapter 29, zoning regulations of the town code regarding accessory dwelling units townwide, town code amendment application A 20001.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Councilmember Saul.
All right, the motion's been made by the Vice Mayor, second by Councilwoman Sayak. Roll call, Vice Mayor.
Yes.
Councilman Rennie.
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayak.
Yes.
The mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. And Ms. Neese, will you read the title, please?
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29, zoning regulations of the town code regarding accessory dwelling units.
Thank you. Which brings us to item 13, which is adoption or approval of a preferred land use alternative framework for the General Plan 2040 update, which has come through the General Plan Advisory Committee and also the Planning Commission. On this one, we have received a new communication, but I will first ask for the staff report, and then we will go to questions from council, then we'll read the comment. So, staff report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. As you mentioned, the town is in the middle of updating its general plan that will look forward to the year 2040. The identification of a preferred land use alternative framework is an important step in the general plan update. This alternative ultimately becomes the framework for the preparation of the general plan land use element and also informs other elements that are required in the general plan. This alternative is going to provide high-level guidance regarding the type and location of land uses, and this, in combination with the town vision and guiding principles, will be used to guide the development of the general plan goals, policies, and implementation programs throughout the process as we work towards the conclusion of the update process. So this item tonight is for the council to consider the Planning Commission and their recommendation of the General Plan Advisory Committee recommended preferred land use alternative framework. Based on that recommendation of the GPAC and the Planning Commission, we recommend the Town Council review the preferred alternative described in Exhibit 11 of Attachment 1. There is a desk item for this matter, and that concludes my report, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. I'll just ask by person, it's maybe a bit easier. Vice Mayor, any questions?
Yes, I do. Staff report, page 2, third paragraph. The last sentence says, blah, blah, blah. The GPAC was to provide 2,000 new residential units. Isn't it to plan for?
It is to plan for, that's correct.
All right, then the next 2 paragraphs down, the last sentence states, the allowed density and redevelopment rates are set at a higher level for properties within the opportunity areas. Would you just, okay, why don't you tell me what that means in some other words?
So on that specific question, the areas inside, and I'll give you one instance. So in the areas that are inside the low density residential land use designation. So if it's inside the opportunity area, the redevelopment level is 10%. So the recommendation is that approximately 10% in the opportunity areas would be redeveloped, whereas outside of the opportunity areas, that percentage is 5%, because we don't imagine that will have the same opportunities as the opportunity areas.
Follow up?
Not at this point.
Okay. Councilman Rennie, questions?
Yeah, let me follow up on the 2,000 units. So that is, the 2,000 units is what they're expecting our RENA allocation will be for the next 3 cycles, is that correct?
I'm going to let Ms. Ferretti answer that.
I think that's a starting point, but we don't know yet what our RENA number is going to be. So the task force felt very strongly that we needed to be planning for at least 2,000 housing units, because we are fully expecting that with Northern California's job boom or prior job boom, that HCD will be looking to all of the communities within our area to provide as much housing as possible. So 2,000 was essentially a goal that was set by the committee.
Other questions, Mr. Rennie?
Okay, so again, we're thinking it's going to be at least 2,000 over the life of this general plan then?
At least, and it could be much, much higher, but for Los Gatos, this seemed like a good place to start.
Okay, if I could switch to a different question.
Yes?
I'm trying to find, I can't find the page quickly in my iPad here, but for the recommended option C, which priority areas are being recommended? Are we recommending the Pollard? I think we're not recommending the Pollard Road and the Union Avenue and the Harwood. Is that correct for option C?
Mr. Paulson, perhaps you can tell us what the opportunity zones are.
Yeah, it's a little more difficult not being there and having a staff report.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So let me look through my information as well. I think currently there is a list of opportunity areas in Exhibit 8 of Attachment 1. So currently, the opportunity areas are designated as Pollard Road, North Santa Cruz Avenue, Winchester Boulevard, Lark Avenue, Los Gatos Boulevard, Union Avenue, and Harwood Road.
Mr. Rennie?
Those are for item C, or those are all of them? I think you've named all of them.
Those are all of them, and all of those are included in option C, to my recollection, but I'm going to quickly scan to check that out.
And my follow-on question then might be, what's the difference between C and D?
The major difference between C and D is the densities and the heights.
Okay, thank you.
Can I move on to Councilwoman Sayoc? Questions?
Yes, so while you have those maps there, I did want to make sure I understood the differences between the different alternatives. So B has stories that could go from 3 to 4, whereas C is just 4 stories. Now, if I'm reading the transcripts correctly, there was some of the public comment and concern is this automatic 4 stories in some of the opportunity zones because of the opportunity for a developer to ask for the density bonus. So if you were to look at alternative B, how does one decide whether it's a 3-story or a 4-story? And then if you chose alternative C, does that automatically mean that every building would be 4 stories?
Thank you, Councilmember Sayoc. So I think what's important is to remember, and we tried to express this to both the GPAC and the Planning Commission, this is kind of setting up the framework. That level of detail will be thoroughly discussed as we move through this process and then ultimately craft the necessary zoning code amendments to implement whatever general plan parameters are ultimately adopted. So I think through stories and height, those are really a couple of the large issues that are going to have to be addressed as we move forward through the process. This, again, is really setting the framework for the potential of how we could potentially accomplish planning for 2,000 housing units.
Any follow-up?
So then if I'm understanding correctly, then there's still, once we approve a framework, there's still a very fluid process to help design standards get to what we want it to look like. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I have another question.
Councilwoman Sayoc, can you hang on for a second? Because I just want to ask a clarifying follow-up to your question as a member of the GPAC, and then we'll move on to your question. So I'm just looking at Ms. Fervetti. The discussion with the 2040 general plan update, as I understand it, is we're kind of going top-down, a vision statement, and then the adoption of land use alternatives, out of which then we develop a land use element, a sustainability element, a housing, whatever it might be. So as Mr. Paulson said, this really is kind of a 40,000-foot level. Then we'll get down to the details of how it works as we work through the process. Am I sort of right about that?
That's absolutely right. There are a lot of details that still need to be worked out, and the General Plan Advisory Committee expressed a lot of different ideas regarding that, so we will be revisiting all of that when we come back and do the land use element. But right now, we really need to set that 40,000-foot level framework so that way we can continue with the rest of the process.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt you, Councilwoman Sayoc. What is your next question?
The next question, I just want to make sure I understand. So the general plan update is a plan for the next 20 years, and housing elements are for every 8 years. So are we looking at the 2,000 number to be for the 20 years or for the next housing element? And does that even really matter?
Well, at this point, we are planning for the 20-year horizon. And in working with the committee, we recognized early on that we needed to be much more aggressive in our plans for housing, and hence the 2,000 units. It's very possible that we might have a RENA number for just this next cycle that would take up all those 2,000 units, and then we'd have to be planning for yet more housing within the context of this general plan. But we don't know. So we thought, let's make sure that we are ahead of this and really planning thoughtfully about where we could introduce some more modest different types of housing types, as well as where we might be able to do more mixed use. So by having a framework, we at least have a path forward once we do get our RENA numbers.
Okay. Any other questions at this time?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. To staff, because actually the questions that have been raised by council members this evening were similar to the GPAC questions and also the Planning Commission questions. So I'm going to ask it probably for the 4th time. What we're in choosing the land use C, I guess it was, the GPAC was, at least I was as a member of GPAC, trying to accommodate a potential RENA mandate. We do not know what the mandate will be, but staff has given us its thoughts And so we were trying to accommodate that. Now, within that context, to staff, if C allows for, let's say, I don't even remember what it was, 4 stories, that doesn't mean the buildings have to have 4 stories. First of all, is that correct?
That's correct. So yeah, clearly, there's a lot of variation within our community, and so we would want to be able to look, land use designation by land use designation, and look at how all the regulations would fit together to result in the desired community. And on page 3 of 6 of your staff report, you can see, some of the bullet points in the center really identified some of the values and other issues that the committee was really trying to balance in its determination of choosing alternative C.
A follow-up, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Yes. One of the issues that came up a lot at GPAC was a concern about single-family residential units, R1. And so, question again of staff, if an R1 home has an ADU within the home, strike that. If we allow R1 zones to have more units or larger units or give them more accommodation than they have now, can they do that and have ADUs?
Mr. Paulson or Ms. Pravetti?
Thank you. This is Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. I'll take a stab at that. So it's really going to depend on the individual lot. Ultimately, we will be crafting the zoning parameters to be consistent with the general plan moving forward. So there's a very high likelihood that the regulations for the CH zone, for instance, which is the mixed-use commercial zone, is going to have very different zoning code requirements than the R1 districts, which abut most of the CH zone. So I think that will be where we can look to control some of that, some of those concerns that were brought up at General Plan Advisory Committee, Planning Commission, and obviously here tonight for the Town Council.
Will we be able to, I try and make it as direct as I can because it did keep coming up at GPAC. Will we be able to maintain R1 homes? Assuming that we move forward with this selection of C.
We will be able to have the opportunity to maintain single-family homes. Obviously, as you stated before, right now, the regulations that just went into place allows up to 3 units on every R1 lot in town. Given that now we have to allow both an ADU and a junior ADU. So right now you can already have 3 units on those lots, but the framework you want to think about is if we set the zoning parameters, and let's just use height and FAR to start off with. You can craft that in a way that even though it may have more units internal or inside what would otherwise look like a single-family home, you can still maintain that single-family home look and feel.
All right, and my last current question, Mayor, and this will be to staff too. I know that we added downtown to our area of consideration, but it was never clear to me what part. Can you describe it by street or something like that?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So generally, it is the C2 designated properties that are along North Santa Cruz, south of Highway 9, and then on Main Street. Those are the 2 areas that contain C2 zoning designations and general plan designations. At the current time,
the height limitation on those streets is something like, you can correct me, 40, 45 feet, and they, at least in some areas, do accommodate residential. So how could this change our downtown? Because I know that's also an important issue to a lot of people.
So currently, you're correct. The height maximum in the downtown C2 zoning designation is 45 feet. And you're also correct in that you can do a mixed-use project, meaning residential above commercial. So those are both already currently in our allowances. That's one of the reasons why staff and the consultants had initially included that portion. So I think moving forward, we'll be incorporating that, and from the physical form of the downtown, that wouldn't change all that dramatically.
Thank you.
Councilman Rennie or Councilwoman Sayoc, any questions?
Yeah, I'm ready for this more.
Okay, Councilman Rennie.
So let me give some thoughts now before I ask the question. When I look at the priority zones that were chosen, it looks to me like what you're trying to do is develop around places where there can be placemaking. These are already areas with some commercial areas that people can walk to. My first thought is when I look at them, they're not all equal. For example, Los Gatos Boulevard is a much different area than, say, Harwood, or Union that have just a small commercial center. And I think what you're trying to do is develop so that people, when we add people to the town, we'd like to find ways that they will be walking more and driving less, which means starting to create places that people will want to walk to and then add the residents in those areas. I see it, when you look at the Downing Center on Union Avenue, it's small. There's a limit to how much people really want to walk to that. We could allow it to get taller and bigger and have more things, but I think there's a limit to how much of a placemaking it can become. So I see that as different than, let's say, Los Gatos Boulevard, where it's a much larger area. So the first question out of that is, if we pick option C, do we later get to fine-tune each priority development area?
Thank you, Councilmember Rennie. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. We definitely could go down that path, and through the future work of General Plan Advisory Committee, the Planning Commission, and ultimately the Town Council, those are things that can be addressed moving through the process and moving forward. There definitely could be different parameters or different regulations for the various opportunity areas.
Okay, thank you. And I, the four-story question is especially, I think, important in that, because I can't see putting 4 stories on Harwood very easily or the Downing Center very easily. But in a large street, you can tend to have taller buildings, maybe with a shorter building in front of it, kind of thing, and it'd be less obvious that it's so big. So I definitely feel like there should be a difference. The second thing as my thought process here, the second question I'm leading to now is, can we designate, or is this the right time, or should it be in the future, that with more placemaking, not just set zoning, but say, again, if we're trying to create an area where people are going to walk to more and drive less, that means, all the amenities somebody might want to walk to, but it also means being able to walk to places where people can sit and be outdoors. And so, for example, Los Gatos Boulevard now, I don't think really has very much of that. There isn't any, I don't know if you want to call it a park, a little something that it's makes it more of a place to go walk to than you drive to and you get your stuff, and then you drive to the next place and you get your stuff. And maybe now we encourage people to walk to buy something at one place and buy at another, then they go home. But if we can designate in these priority areas a certain amount of placemaking requirement, that might help us create a less of a driven development. Can you comment on that?
Thank you, Councilmember Redding. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. Yes, I think that the time for having those conversations is definitely coming, and that can be handled through goals, policies, and implementation programs, and then ultimately would trickle down to potential zoning code requirements addressing that specific issue.
And one more question I have at this time. So the Winchester Priority Development Area, is that targeting trying to get density near the potential future light rail to that area? Is that the reason for choosing that particular development area? Or is it really what's your thought about the commercial center that was there?
Thank you, Councilmember Redding. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. That was part of it, but pretty limited. I mean, I think we, again, tried to look for areas that had infrastructure and or these neighborhood commercial centers so that we could get to a point, as you mentioned previously, where folks have the opportunity where we're placing potentially increased density of housing, opportunities to walk for some of their goods and services rather than having to drive.
And is there anything at this point that is going to keep us in the future trying to look at more density around the light rail area?
There is not. I mean, obviously we have this general plan update. Should that specific item come forward in the future and be funded, then ultimately that's something that we could revisit if necessary at a future general plan update specific to that area.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a chicken and egg. It's not going to get funded unless there's more density planned or in the process. That's all my questions for now, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes, thank you. So I want to just follow up on that and all the comments that all of you have shared on how this process is very organic and still opportunities to help create what this vision looks like is helpful to me. Could staff just walk through, so for those that are paying attention, it's very clear now this is a framework, and then it's going to go back, and then we just refine the details that go from this framework. Can you walk us through what that process looks like, so for those that want to pay attention and continue to pay attention, know when to insert themselves?
Mr. Paulson or Ms. Perfetti?
Thank you, Councilmember Sayoc. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. So we are, staff would love to have folks participate all along the way. So currently, up until our recent situation with COVID, the General Plan Committee was beginning to go through individual elements of the general plan. That work continues, and then we will be going through each of the elements one by one if necessary, or sometimes multiples. So when we get back to having an opportunity to have meetings with the GPAC, definitely would encourage folks to attend those. We also have the website that folks can go to, which is losgatos2040.org. Ultimately, there's going to be some back and forth because obviously, a lot of the elements are intertwined, and we may make modifications in one element that we then need to make modifications in another element moving forward. But the opportunities are, I won't say limitless, but there's going to be an abundance of opportunities moving forward through various formats for folks to get involved and to get their voices heard moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask a couple questions and then see if there's others. Remember that we do have one public comment yet that we need to read into the record. Mr. Paulson, Ms. Pravetti, I just want to ask a question based on what I've heard from fellow council people. As I understand it, what we're doing by adopting a land use alternative, whatever it might be, is we have, as people have said, either 40,000 foot or a framework, and then the GPAC would go through and develop a land use element that we're all familiar with that would say, our goal is X, and we're going to do that by these implementation measures that we see in a general plan. So for example, if the goal was placemaking, it could be, our goal is to do placemaking, and here's how we're going to do it, parks, whatever that may be. But that's still down the road. Right now, all we're doing is saying, okay, this is what we're going to work within as we develop those other goals and land use alternatives. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and so then my other question is, with respect to how the public gets involved, I believe, remind me, the LosGatos2040.org website has a specific community engagement page that shows people where GPAC is in the process or where various things in the process and allows them to comment in just as they go to the web page, correct?
That's correct. There is a dedicated web page, and Director Paulson can remind us what that address is. And there's opportunities for online engagement as well as submitting email comments at any time.
Okay.
Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Paulson.
Joel Paul. Yes, thank you. So just want to make sure everyone knows that website, which is LosGatos2040.com, not .org as I previously stated.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And there is a engagement page on that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to take a break for questions right now and ask Ms. Neese to read the public comment that we did get today. So Ms. Neese, are you ready for that?
Yes, I have three to read.
Thank you.
So the first is from Jim Foley. He has been monitoring the general plan update and particularly the housing element and agree with the alternative created by the GPAC committee and agree with including the additional 8th opportunity area for downtown. I think they did a great and thorough job identifying all 8 opportunity areas for planning for additional housing, and they won the support of the Planning Commission, which is a testament to their hard work. Do you want me to continue with the next one?
Yeah, thank you. Just identify, actually, when you're finished, and then identify the writer, and then identify when you're finished.
Okay. The next one is from Kim.
I think it's Vrjen is how you pronounce it, V-R-J-E-N.
Something like that, yeah. So hers is your decision tonight on how to guide the consultants for the next phase of the 2040 general plan is critical to the future look and feel of Los Gatos. As I stated at the Planning Committee meeting, I am opposed to using option C and hope that you will decide instead to use option B. My greatest concern with option C is the possibility of 4-story buildings. I do not think that 4-story buildings should be used regularly in town. Most of the current buildings are 1 or 2-story, and I think we should maintain that look and feel. Los Gatos Boulevard is the area that I am most familiar with, and I was alarmed by the visual examples for that corner shown in the Land Use Alternatives Report, pages 34 and 35, and included here. Imagine driving down Los Gatos Boulevard. Option C would dominate all other buildings in the area and does not match the small town feel of the rest of Los Gatos. I have a similar negative reaction to replacing the quaint Safeway shopping center at Pollard and Moore with enormous buildings. Worst of all, those are examples and opportunity areas where there could easily be more than one of these building monstrosities. Based on my understanding of the North 40 project, I am also concerned about the application of bonuses to future projects. If we fundamentally accept 4-story buildings, I believe with bonuses, we could be forced to accept 5-story buildings. What I learned from the North 40 project is that we, as a town, can define the parameters, but the developers choose how to apply them. The developers are motivated to maximize their investment and are well-versed in state mandates to increase housing. I think we must anticipate a worst case where additional height is added by the state. 4-story buildings are already out of place. 5-story buildings in the middle of our residential areas is appalling. The planning committee argued that the town will still have to approve every building. Given the state climate of removing decision-making from the town, I am not comfortable with that assumption. I worry once building heights are included in our general plan, developers will apply to maximize them, and the town will have a hard time denying their usage. I am also very concerned about the impact these large buildings will have on traffic, especially along Lark, Winchester, and Los Gatos Boulevard. The existing level of service given in the Land Use Alternatives Report for Los Gatos Boulevard is D's and D's. Our community expectation is that when North 40 is completely, traffic in that area will be even worse. The report states that both option B and C will moderately impact traffic even more. I assume that larger buildings with more people have a larger impact. I think every effort should be made to minimize increased traffic in the area, and therefore option C should be rejected. Finally, option B gets close to the anticipated 2,000 house ask from the state for additional housing.
So, Ms. Neese, I'm sorry, I got too close to the mic. I am trying to keep with the 3-minute limit, and I know it's difficult when we're reading. How much is left? Because we are at 3 minutes.
Two sentences.
Okay, finish, please.
Okay. I think we should choose option B and challenge the consultants to look more closely at the possibility of duplexes and adding living spaces over retail downtown and elsewhere. I embrace the ideas in the missing middle document and would like to see them represented in the vision for 2040. Mixing in duplexes and other small apartment buildings are much more in line with Los Gatos as a town. Option C is the wrong choice for Los Gatos and will destroy the town charm that we all know and love. We can do better.
Okay, thank you very much. I understand that the next item is also long. I don't want you to speed read, but we're going to try to keep in the 3 minutes, so let us know who that's from and go ahead.
This one is from Lee Quintana. To Mayor and Town Council, I am one of the 2 members of the GPAC that voted no on the recommendation of Alternative C to the Town Council. I support of the increase in dwelling units proposed by Alternative C, as I stated during the GPAC meeting. However, I do not support Alternative as a whole. Many of the reasons I voted no have been expressed by members of the public or by the Planning Commission members as recorded in the minutes of the Planning Commission hearing. Additional thoughts, comments, reasons for my decision. This needs to be an interactive process. The Town Council has established both a vision and guiding principles to guide the development of the general plan update. I share others' concerns about the timing of the choose of a preferred alternative within the general plan process. Choosing a preferred alternative prior to the revising the goals and policies consistent with the vision and principles and without first considering a more comprehensive update of the GP land use map may result in a GP map that is inconsistent with the text of the general plan, which would be inconsistent with state law. The state also requires that the zoning code be consistent with the GP map and text of the general plan. Any of the proposed alternatives, if adopted, will require considerable revisions to the existing zoning code. Please consider adding a statement to the general plan to state that when a conflict exists between the general plan map or the general plan text and the zoning code, that the general plan will rule. Please consider amending applicable sections of the zoning code concurrent with the adoption of the general plan to avoid conflicts which could leave the town without enforceable standards. Intensity versus density. There is a difference between intensity, the amount of development, mass, square footage, etc., and density, the number of dwelling units per acre. For example, if an FAR in a residential area allows up to 4,000 square feet on a lot, the intensity, this could allow one 4,000 square foot unit, 2,000 square foot units, or one 2,000 square foot and 2 1,000 square foot units, or some other combination that does not exceed 4,000 square feet. The development's intensity remains the same, though the density may be increased. I believe the intensity of the development allowed is more important than density in preserving neighborhoods. The same holds true with respect to mixed use or multifamily development. The same density can result in a considerable range of observed intensity depending on the size of the units allowed. Question, where the general plan map defines a density range, does that establish a minimum density required, or is the choice entirely left to the developer? Are proposed changes to the GP land use map major or minor? The changes proposed to the general plan land use map have been limited to adding opportunity areas and to changing the definition of density of existing land use designations. The definition of low-density residential would change from 0 to 5 GU acre to 5 to 16 units acre, which spans the current density for medium-density residential and crosses into high-density residential under the current definition. The changes may be...
Okay, Ms. Neese, I'm getting the signal that that's 3 minutes. How much more is there on the comment?
About 2/3 of the page.
Okay, I think we're going to... If I get consensus by saying yes from the other members of the council that you want to continue to listen to the entire comment. Was this distributed as a desk item, by the way, or did it come in too late for that? Ms. Pravetti is shaking her head. Okay. So do other members of the council wish to have Ms. Neese read the complete statement?
It's fine with me.
Okay.
I'd like to hear
Okay.
that.
All right. So Ms. Neese, go ahead.
Okay. The changes may be, and from public testimony as a PC have been, perceived as major changes of allowed density, nor do the changes made appear to encourage development consistent with attributes of missing middle housing, move significantly, smaller footprints, and smaller unit sizes. The proposed land use map is easy to interpret as resulting in major increases to density, which will result in changes to neighbor character. Comprehensive update of the GP land use map and need to reconsider the Town Council's original directive for general plan update. The last comprehensive update of general plan land use map occurred almost 30 years ago. Since then, there have been major changes in the economy, in the need for housing, in how retail and commercial activities are conducted, and in the legislative atmosphere. Changes that cannot be addressed by a minor adjustment to the general plan. Please reconsider the Town Council's original directive for the GP update. Expand the mandate to take a more comprehensive look at changes to the general plan land use map, including but not limited to redefine, eliminate, or add land use designations, increase the number of residential designations to provide a more gradual increase in residential density, eliminate overlapping densities, increase the number of hillside residential designations, created a direct correlation between general plan land uses and zoning code designations, divide land uses into 3 categories: residential mixed use, non-residential mixed uses, and non-residential residential. Define the opportunity areas more precisely to support the concept of missing middle housing. Include intensification of non-residential uses and preferred alternatives. Include potential intensification of non-residential development, potential increased employees, concurrent with increases in dwelling units, i.e. consider jobs, housing balance. The two are interrelated. It is my understanding that potential increases in non-residential development will consider separately as part of the alternative analysis required for the EIR. However, the level of analysis required for an EIR alternative is considerably less than that required for the EIR analysis of the preferred alternative. And that's the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, we don't have an opportunity for questions, but if any questions are raised, to the people who submitted the comments, but if there are questions that are raised as a result of that, Mr. Rennie, you have a question?
Yeah, that was a very dense read to absorb, not even being able to read it. But the feeling I got was at least 3/4 of it is not this high level. It's part of the next steps. Could staff confirm that my general understanding is correct, that most of what those concerns could be addressed in the next steps?
Mr. Paulson or Ms. Pravetti?
Thank you, Councilmember Rennie. You're correct. These are also, most of these items have also been brought up during our general plan advisory committee meetings. And so they have discussed those and or decided not to discuss those, a number of these items. moving forward, but there will be opportunities, and the actual right time to do many of these things is moving forward. It's not at this current stage of the update process.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor or Ms. Sayak?
Question here, thank you. When we talk about the right time to answer or address those questions is down the line or further down the line, are we looking mainly at the drafting of the land use element or something else?
Well, I would say it's all of the above. It will be in drafting the land use element and then moving forward after the general plan is adopted to implement the general plan through modifications to the zoning code.
Thank you.
Ms. Sayak, any questions?
Yes, and I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it. So I understand that there's a lot of opportunity for us to weigh in the future. And one of the things that I'm trying to grapple with is the housing accountability and how we have to really be clear, objective versus subjective. Does that also apply to a general plan, or is that more in the work that's to be followed?
Thank you, Councilmember Sayak. So that is something that can be implemented through the general plan and zoning ordinance requirements and or other policy documents.
Okay, so then let's take, for example, the height, where most people have concern. If we allow up to 4 feet in some areas, how do we decide what those areas will be? Is that through the element, where we decide, which streets or which opportunity areas those heights are more appropriate?
Thank you. Again, Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. Yes, so in some of our current general plan land use designations, there is a maximum height referenced in there. For the ones that don't have a maximum height, they can be referenced in the general plan, so that can be added. And this is something we've talked about. There could be FAR maximums added. Some have FAR maximums, some don't currently. There's also some that have coverage maximums and some don't currently in the current general plan. So those are items that could be added to help try to define a little better some sense of certainty as far as what the ultimate development building off of could look like.
And that, if I may,
And then
Well, hang on, Ms. Sayak, Ms. Pavetti?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add, if I could, that what Director Paulson was just identifying are really good objective standards that help us create the community that we want. But in addition, we have the opportunity to make sure that we have policy language that also will help guide the appropriate density and housing type to different locations within the community. So we have both mechanisms to our avail.
Ms. Sayak?
Okay, thank you. And then my last question. So in the past, I've mentioned, for example, our Los Gatos Boulevard plan and how it's outdated. And that contains certain criteria that could be updated to reflect, it could be used as a tool to help guide us design what Los Gatos Boulevard should look like with this new change. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, staff, for answering all of those questions. Now we will move on, hopefully, to a motion or discussion of a motion. Is there a motion?
This is Councilmember Rennie. I'll go ahead.
Please do.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept the recommended alternative C that the GPAC worked through and Planning Commission worked through. And the reason I'm going with C is I certainly think, an alternative D, 5 stories is getting to be pretty excessive. My concern for certainly not going with A or B is the number of units that we're going to have to plan for. I really feel strongly that we need to do a smart plan, that if we're going to be adding this many more citizens in Los Gatos, we need to find ways to reduce the amount of driving. I think planning for spaces, larger areas that, for everything I've read, when you do placemaking with more dense housing, you get less driving, you get better use of resources, more efficient use of resources, more efficient use of land, more walking, more alternative modes of transportation. Many people would say we just can't afford much more driving. So one of the suggestions was to do B, because instead we should add duplexes and other, small spread throughout. And I really feel that that's a mistake. That's a recipe for every house you add now has to drive, because it's not going to be near places people can walk to buy things or to sit and enjoy, or the other reasons you go to a place. So I think C is probably a good compromise, a good sweet spot for this. I do worry that the number of dwellings is going to be low for what we're going to need by the time 2040 comes around. Maybe we'll come up with some more ideas, but I think C is a good option at this time.
All right, so there's a motion to approve preferred land use alternative C made by Councilman Rennie. Is there a second? Okay, I'm going to second it. And then look to the remaining members, and I'm going to second it for a number of reasons. I am a member of the General Plan Advisory Committee, and that committee worked through this alternative very diligently and very thoroughly, and a lot of the items that we've heard tonight were discussed at the time. The committee really felt that it was important to be planning for RHNA numbers. We pointed out that Southern California Association of Governments just gave out the RHNA numbers for Southern California, and they were up in the area of 3,000 units. So we can be sure, and also combined with things that we've heard from Senator Scott Wiener, that places that encourage employment or have employment centers should expect to have their housing numbers go up. Because we do have Netflix, that would be, we are an area where Senator Wiener is looking for us to provide housing for those workers. But beyond that, we need to recognize that we need to be planning, as Councilman Rennie says, for a not entirely changed community, but in some respects, a better community that has multimodal transportation, that has different types of housing options, that is looking toward the future by respecting its past. But I'm not saying that we wholesale change the entire town, but this framework doesn't mandate that we do that. It gives us the opportunity to use a framework to go through and use our processes that have worked for us in the past to develop objective standards, to develop placemaking, to develop opportunities for multimodal transportation and different land uses. And this is the starting point for that. So I am seconding the motion so that we can move forward with a vision for the Los Gatos of the future. Other comments on the motion?
This is Councilmember Sayek. I'll be supporting the motion for the reasons that the motion, the maker of the motion and the seconder have said. I think we have an opportunity, excuse me, I'm excited personally to use this as an opportunity to help get the community engaged with what they would like these different opportunity areas to look like. I've stated in the past, it's time to update the Los Gatos Boulevard. This is the perfect vehicle to do that. And I think there's a great opportunity to connect the northern and the southern parts of Los Gatos into a cohesive town. And I think this entire process allows the community to get engaged with that.
Vice Mayor, any comments?
No, thank you.
Hearing nothing, I'm going to call the question. Again, a roll call vote. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, it passes unanimously. And that concludes our scheduled agenda items this evening. Thanks so much, council members, for calling in. Thank you for your diligent work, continuing to help our community and continuing to get things done. And if any of you are out there, and for our staff that's here tonight, any of you that might be out there watching, we all wish you the best. We hope that you are safe, healthy, and your loved ones are also safe and healthy. And thank you for everything that you are doing to make sure that we all stay that way. Good night.